Let's see. My volume levels, let's take that down. 175. Oh my goodness. And it's the 27th today. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. Today we're going to make another painting by another one of my very, very, very favorite artists. Today is the well-known artist from China, Keran. And let's take a look at some of his work right here, right off the top, so you can see what we're going to... Nope, not that one. Come on, computer. There we are. So this is the painting we're going to recreate today. Depending on how things go, we could also do this one. Both of these paintings are among his most famous paintings and also the most expensive paintings that he ever did. So this painting here, the Jinggang Mountains from 1976, I think sold about 5 years ago for, I think, 18 million US, around there, somewhere around there. It might have been closer, maybe it was in the low 20 millions, but a little bit outside of my price range, either way. Just on the edge of outside of my my range. And then this one here, Thousands of Hills in a Crimsoned View from 1964. This one I think sold for like 40 million, I think 42 million or something. So, and this might be the highest selling or most expensive painting that he ever did. I can't quite remember. It's been, I'm usually doing the prep for these episodes about 2 months ahead of where we actually are, so I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I think I'm pretty close. Anyway, so these are the paintings we're about to do, or at least we're going to start this one. We'll see how far we go, and if we want, we might do a second one. I will let you know that I did some outlines of both of these paintings so that we can transfer these outlines onto a canvas so that you can get pretty darn close to the actual original composition of these paintings. And let's show you how we found those. I'll talk about this video and a few other ones here shortly. But if you look in the video description down below, you'll see a Dropbox link. And in that Dropbox, you'll see a bunch of folders. And these are all folders of artists that we've already painted, including Lin Fengmian, or Fengmian, just a couple of days ago. And here's today's artist. And if you're interested in what's coming up down the road, we can scroll down here. This is the next month of painting. So there's some pretty big heavy hitters coming up down the road here. Including, actually we're doing a special episode on this Sunday. I'm going to paint a picture of Hayley Wickenheiser while the Dream Gap Tour, the women's hockey tournament that's taking place right now in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. So if you're interested in making a painting of a hockey player, maybe you're interested, maybe you're not, but it'll take place on Sunday at the same time that hockey game is going on. It's the championship game for women's hockey. And next Tuesday, because of Children's Day, International Children's Day, we're going to do a Peppa Pig painting, which is my daughter's favorite. So anyway, let's click on here. If you click on this folder, you will see a bunch of different files. You will see everything I've just shown you, and the only reason why there's 6 files instead of 4 here is that there's 2 versions of each of these outlines. One's a JPEG, one's a PDF. So really, ultimately, there's just 4 different files. So if you do that, let's see, you can print these pages out onto regular photocopy paper. I just like thicker paper. So that's why, but there's no difference whatsoever in the type of paper you use, because really you're just going to use it to transfer the image onto a canvas. So let's do that right now. So I always seem to get these upside down and backwards and around, so this might be the first time I ever deliberately go, oh, okay, that's the upside. You'll see I'm painting on a 9x12 sized canvas in the Arteza brand, which is listed in the video description below. So the first thing I'm going to do, well, actually, the very first step you didn't see, because what I usually do is I unwrap these out of the plastic, and then I give it a nice quick sanding with some 220 grit sandpaper. You see I've just wrapped it around a block of 2x4 and put some staples on there. It makes it really easy to hold the sandpaper, right? So I just took it out of the plastic, gave it a quick sand, and then I added some acrylic gesso. So I just brushed that on, and just a couple days ago I did that, and I had the whole floor covered with them. You just let them sit at least a couple of hours, let them dry. Overnight is even better. The longer you let paint dry, the better it is, right, till it fully cures. So then I'm again going to take my sandpaper and sand it, and this is just going to help create the smoothest possible surface. And some people like that, some people don't like it. Some people like a really highly textured surface. We are going to be painting a painting, or paintings, depending on how fast we go, that was originally done on paper. I'm pretty sure it was done on paper, as most Chinese paintings were done throughout history, even up until relatively recently. Just the Eastern tradition generally has been using paper over canvas. I mean, we're talking over 1,000 years of Chinese painting, and almost, let's say, 95% of that history has been done on paper. So, and that paper is relatively smooth, right? The Chinese were really the ones that invented it, and they perfected it. And so, anyway, let's sand this down. And so once I sand it down, I usually, you could probably see me do this many a time, just wipe it off on my clothes. But that also, you can see how much powder comes off of these canvases when we sand them, right? And that's taking the tooth, like, I don't even, you obviously wouldn't be able to see the difference in texture, but one is very smooth, and obviously there's a little bit of powder probably still on there. If you really want to get rid of it, you could just take a light, like a rag, dip it in some water, and just quickly, just a very damp rag, or lightly damp rag, and then just wipe off any excess, but I haven't seen any kind of major problems. But anyway, let's do a second one there, and you'll see, let's do this. Oh, we did that one. Let's do this one. Right, so lots of, basically what's inside gesso is like plaster, right? Like if you ever broke your arm or finger, right, and they wrapped it in plaster, right? That's basically what's inside of gesso. And so what it does is it helps fill in the little gaps in the weave of the canvas. If you want something even smoother, you could paint directly on panels, like smooth plywood or luan, the kind of stuff that doors are often made with. Doors are often use a very thin piece of wood. Okay, so let's arrange this on the canvas. And actually, let's take a look at the original. This seems side by side. So, obviously, I'm painting. This is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper on a 9 by 12 canvas, so there's a little bit more space. So you can kind of decide, where do I want to add? Do I want to put it right in the middle? You can put it right in the middle. I'm actually going to put mine a little bit further down, maybe around there. So there's a little bit more space at the top and bottom, just so I have a little bit more airy room at the top. That's just 100% personal preference. There's no genius idea behind that. I will say that one of Lee Keran's trademarks often is a very, very high horizon line, and this is not. Neither of these are really good examples. Well, actually, so this would be your horizon line, right? So the horizon is where the sun goes down, right? It disappears, where the sky meets the ground. So that would be your horizon line when we talk about perspective. And if you're like, I don't know what we're talking about, I cover that in my 40 episode long How to Draw course, which is free here on YouTube. So feel free to check that out if you like. Anyway, let's, this is strange. I want to make sure that I'm actually live here. Okay. Usually there's a bunch of people in the chat right now, so I was like, oh, there's nothing in the chat, and a couple of weeks ago I forgot to go live. And I didn't even realize it. The reason I realized it was I was like, wow, we're like half an hour in and there's no one in the chat. That's very unusual. So maybe somebody just types in a hello in there just to make sure that I'm not talking to myself again for a while. That would be awesome. Okay, so I'm not going to trace everything on here. I'm just going to get the kind of the basics of the shapes in place, the basic parts of the composition, the major elements in here. And we're going to paint layers of paint, including a kind of, oh, there's Heidi. Thanks for leaving the comment. So we're going to we're going to paint a kind of cream paper-like coat, underpainting over top of this. So I'm actually pressing relatively hard on my pencil to help ensure that these lines make it through that first layer of paint, which will have some white in it, and as we've talked about many times, that white paint can cover up lines really well. That's one of the great things it can do, but if you're hoping to be able to see your lines, well, it can cause some surprises when those lines disappear. Okay, let's see, what else? This waterfall here. Okay, let's do a few of these up here. And then I'll get into the biography of the artist once we start getting the paint onto the canvas here, because I really want to, especially if we end up doing a couple of paintings, I really want to be able to get to the painting as quickly as possible, and then I can yammer on while I'm painting, right? Although it's definitely one of the, as I've learned over the past year of doing this, talking and painting at the same time are a little bit different mental. It uses different parts of the brain, so it can be a little bit tricky. But I do my best. Sometimes I think after, did I make any sense? Or have I just been babbling while I'm painting or drawing just like this? Okay, so these basically just act as like anchors for things. Now, there's a lot of these little tiny figures in the painting. even in my drawing, they're pretty simplified, right? This is you know, a relative. It's like this painting originally is probably like 2 by 3 feet. I don't know the exact dimensions, but it's larger, right? So you'd be able to see all that detail if you were to see it in person. Let me just see. Now that I have them side by side. Okay, so let's just. It probably wasn't the best choice to use this graphite paper, which is on its last legs, because the more and more I use it, the less graphite there is that can transfer onto the canvas. So I didn't even think about. In fact, I'm just going to toss that out before I use it again. And let's just see. Let's see the difference when I use a brand new one. I've never done them side by side, so I'm just going to really quickly do the other one just while I'm right here. So let's use this tape again. Let's move that one to the side. Okay, there's everybody in the chat. So that's cool. Okay, let's line that up real quick. Again, I'm just leaving a little bit more room on top. And so I chose these two paintings not because I didn't actually realize that they were, it's almost by chance that I picked these two paintings, and then just today, just doing a little bit of a refresher, realized, like, whoa, these are his like most expensive paintings. I think there's one that would be in between these as well. But I picked them because they represent two very different styles of his, or let me see, two very different, different styles that he used in the kind of 1960s and 70s. This dark red and then the very dark black. So these are kind of like his trademark pieces. And he obviously did lots of other things too, including a lot of figurative artwork and animal paintings. But anyway, I thought these would be as close to like the most recognizable kind of images from his vast oeuvre of artwork. Oeuvre. I don't get a chance to say that very often, so body of work, his career, etc. Let's just come down here. So let me just see the difference between these two. Yeah, not as much darker as I thought it would be with a fresh piece of carbon paper, but there's it's a little bit more dense because there's more carbon that can come out. There's no gaps in there, but I'm surprised I thought it was going to be much darker anyway. So let's try to get all this done in the next couple of minutes. And obviously, again, I use a red pencil to do this so that I can see what I've done and what I haven't done. Because I've done this many times without, and sometimes you peel a paper off, and let's say you're doing somebody's face, you realize, oh, I forgot to do the eyes. How did I forget to do that? You know, if you're using a different colored pencil than what you're transferring, it's much easier to really quickly see what's there and what might be missing, right? So there is a method to my madness. Surprise, which might be a surprise for some. Okay, let's get... some of this I think I'll just do when I'm actually painting it. And, you know, some of it will get covered up anyway, so... so these houses here. Again, very small details, so I might simplify some of this as I paint it, just because you know, doing small detail. This is intended to be, you know, a beginner's painting class, and I don't want to, you know, doing tiny little details requires a lot of brush control, and it can take a lifetime to build up this type of skill of, you know, and you know, it's something I struggle with. Although, to be honest, I'm probably more just impatient than I am incapable of doing it. Often I'm just like, how long do I want to spend on little details? Because it's not the work that I do personally. Actually, when I was younger, I used to have a lot more details. So you can kind of see where I've kind of some of the missing things that are off here. So let's peel that away, and let's start mixing some paint. So we got our two canvases side by side. Okay. Beautiful. So get my palette out, and my paint out, and my paint brushes. Everything fits inside of a shoebox, which is just the way I like it. That way it kind of cleans up really easy. I'm fortunate enough to have a studio that is big enough that I can just leave all my art supplies out all night long for a week, and it doesn't get in anybody's way. But I know that that's, you know, quite rare, especially for beginner artists. It would be weird to be a beginner and to have a big studio space. Most people, when they're beginning, you're like, oh, let me just see how this works, and I'll paint on my kitchen table, and if I get into it, maybe I'll invest the money in a much larger space, right? So I'm always like, especially with these episodes, really trying to think like, what if I was a beginner and I wanted, like, I want to be able to see exactly how the whole process works from beginning to end, which makes things go a little much slower maybe than it might otherwise, but and I know that there's many people who are watching right now who've seen me do this over and over and over again, episode after episode. But roughly 50% or more, often for some of these videos, 90% of the viewers are people that have never seen me ever before, right? So I try not to assume that everyone has been following me for months and months and months. So, okay, so I'm going to put some white on here. Good. I've got a whole bunch more paint in behind, but sometimes I get the I have like 3 tubes of blue and none of the red or something, right? Like, oh, I just want to make sure I actually have. Okay, so let's look at this painting and think about making this cream color. What I'm going to do is, we're going to mix kind of like a brown, and then we're just going to make it progressively more and more, or we're going to take a little bit of that brown, mix it in with the white so that we have a relative, like a pretty light creamy color. So let's take some warm yellow. Let's take some warm red. We mix that together, we're going to get an orange, right? Yellow and red make orange. Just as if we used cool yellow and cool red, we'd also get an orange. And if you're wondering what the yellow, what these colors are, why a warm or a cool, and what all that means, there's a whole 45 episode long how to paint course, which you may find it enjoyable, but I think like the first few episodes for a newcomer would be really helpful. We do the whole color wheel. Okay, so basically I took my warm yellow, my warm red, and a little bit of warm blue. And you can see when I scoop it out, I just I don't mix it right in. I put it down here, and then I can add a little bit more to make it as dark as I need it, right? And if it looks too purpley, that's because we got too much blue and red in it. If it looks too dark, it's probably because there's too much blue in it. If it looks too reddish, obviously there's too much red. Rarely will you ever have too much yellow, because yellow's the least dominant of these three colors. So it takes a lot more yellow to lighten it up than it would, it takes like 5 times the amount of yellow to lighten it than the blue, right? You put a little bit of blue in it, boom, it goes light, or it goes dark much quicker, sorry. Okay, so this is my kind of brown color. Now let's just I'm going to mix this right in here. Okay. So let's just add more and more white to this. All right, so we're tinting the color. When we add white to a color, we're tinting it. So I'm just going to scrape this paint off. And I'm going to use just a rag here to just take off the excess paint. Because we've got a lot of paint inside the bristles. I'm not even going to bother cleaning it. I just want to take the excess paint. Remember when I was mixing, you could use a different color or a different brush, but I'm just a frugal person. So, okay. So let's take a look at the color here. So you can see I add more and more white to it. And now we've got, that's pretty good. It is really deceptive. Like, often you could be like, wow, look at that. That's like barely any difference between the white and this paint. And it's not until you put it on the canvas you realize, whoa, it's still actually quite much darker than I was expecting. Okay, so now I'm going to put some water on here. This is probably the only time I'll use water in this. Well, I might. Well, we'll see. But often this is the only time I use any water in here. Okay, so you see how it's almost like gets a little bit darker as I mix that together a little bit more. So I'm just going to add most of that white back in here. It's still very creamy looking, which is not bad, but I think, you know what, I'm going to add more white. And to be honest, if the color was still really dark, I wouldn't even bother. I would just put my white in a separate square or wherever and take my paintbrush and just mix it into here, not mixing it into this color. I think my color is pretty good, but it takes a lot of white to lighten up a color, right? Like that white I put in there made some effect, some change, but very little. So I'm just going to dilute this a lot. But you know what? This is fine because it's always easier to add more paint if it's, because this is going to make the paint quite transparent, which is exactly what I want, because I want to be able to see these pencil lines that I drew down here, right? So let's move that. Let's start with this one here. Okay, that's much better. See, very transparent, which is actually a great thing for this particular purpose. And if I feel like it's not dark enough, I can easily just do another coat of paint on here. And because it's so transparent that another coat, once it's dry, obviously, another coat of paint will just make it that much, little bit progressively darker, right? You could maybe do 3 coats of very, very thin paint. So what this is this is basically like a wash we're applying on here. If you're a watercolorist, you've heard that term many times. But it's also what we would call an underpainting, or it's even before the underpainting. This would be sort of still just prepping the canvas. We will do an underpainting here shortly. So that's great. You can see here, this is a white canvas without any paint on it compared to this one, so it's just a little bit different. I just want something that, because we're going to have some canvas showing through in these paintings, so I personally would prefer not to just have a plain white showing through. I'd like for it to have a little bit of color coming through here. So this is my other canvas. I put a lot of water. I don't usually put that much water in there, just sort of like poured out of the container, but and then just quickly go over my edges here. I wouldn't be too worried about any streaks happening. What I'm doing here is a little bit getting rid of streaks, but I'm also trying to, I just really want to make sure the paint gets into any little nooks and crannies to hide the white. Okay, so again, let's just see. Here's a white piece of paper. Almost not noticeable, the difference, but that's what I'm looking for personally. So let's put that there to dry. And just while I'm here, I'll just wipe all of this excess off. Like you can see, if I didn't have any water in my paint, there'd be no way I could just wipe my table completely clean like that so quickly. A couple things: the water breaks the bonds of the adhesive property of the paint, so even if it dried, it's not going to be as sticky, or won't stick to any surface as well as it would just right out of the tube. So by adding water to it, remember you clean your acrylic off of your paintbrushes with water, right? So you don't want to add too much water to your paint, otherwise it's just pigment and powder that's sitting on the surface and not glued on there in any way. Okay, so I'm just going to blow dry this to help speed up the process. So that's almost dry. While that's drying, let's just take a couple of seconds to look at... I forgot to mention that there's a private Facebook group just for people who are watching me right now, and so that you can kind of see what upcoming videos are, and it's a great community of people who are painting along with me and uploading their versions of today's painting, as well as people who are working on their own things here. Oh, cool. Look at this Charme. Wow, I love it. So this is our Chi by Chi paintings that we did a few weeks ago. And she's got them hanging up in an office there. They look great on there. That's so cool. And here's Heidi's version of the lean painting. Oh, wow, cool. That's great. And I think we've looked at some of these last class here. There's Deborah's version. Well, actually, what's kind of funny about this is her version of the Yoshitomo Nara and Yayoi Kasuma painting kind of blended together. So two artists that we did a few weeks ago blended into one painting. I love that. I love seeing when people start getting more and more creative with these episodes and give their own spin to it. So I'll talk a lot more about Lee Keran's biography as we paint. I don't know how much is on here in the Wikipedia page. What do I want to say about him? There's a couple of great little videos here. They're short, 20-minute long video. I'll put them in the video description. I think I just realized they're not there. But great interview. This is an interview with Lee Keran's son, who's the art teacher, artist himself, and head of, I think, the National Academy in, does it say down here? No. There's Li Gang, but anyway, very interesting interview. And actually, I just sort of paused it right here, right towards the end, where he gets quite choked up as he's talking about his father and his father's kind of the paintings that he liked the most of his own artwork were the paintings he did of people. And those paintings, to our eyes right now, there's nothing controversial about them at all. But when he painted these in the 1960s and 70s, they were... you could get in a lot of trouble, right? You're thinking at that time in China, the Cultural Revolution is in full swing, and it could be very dangerous for an artist to paint images outside of the official style of painting, the social realist style, which, let me see, here's just really quickly, you can see all of his, a set of paintings. You can start seeing like similar kind of colors and styles, like black and red throughout all these images. And then of course like the paper kind of color, right? So we have really, you can obviously, Chinese artists in particular have been Chinese and Japanese artists as well, but really Chinese artists often, maybe more so than anyone else I can think of, were because a lot of Japanese art is influenced by Chinese art, and back and forth. There was a lot of, but anyway, the so-called the white of the paper, or the blank space, or what we would call the negative space around, let's say, this water buffalo. Or is this a water buffalo? Yeah. Which is, don't forget to remind me of the water buffalo when we talk about this artist. But so we would call this like our positive shape, the water buffalo, and then the negative space around it, right? And Chinese artists are kind of famous for leaving lots of negative space or blank space on the canvas. Anyway, and so obviously that color that's left becomes, you know, it's a shape. It becomes like another color that the artist is painting with, right? It's almost like you're painting with the blank space, right? So, but let me, you know what, I think it's worth, just since we've talked about this a few times. So this here, you can see socialist realist art, you know, begins, it's a feature that begins in Russia when communism began there, although not the beginning of communism, the beginning of you know, the Russian Revolution. The artists in Russia were making very, very daring paintings, including the very first fully abstract paintings by Malevich and friends, Malevich and friends. But it's like this kind of thing. This is when people think of like social realist painting or social. There's two different things. Socialist realist painting. This is the kind of stuff here, and let's just see if we can see the Chinese version of it. Right, so they're often like propaganda posters, right? And people will they were referred to as propaganda art during the time by the Chinese, right? It wasn't seen as like a negative term to talk about wanting to make propaganda art, right? It's all about trying to convey the ideals of the society. So this is the kind of thing that was pretty much, if you were an artist, this is what you had to paint when you were in China and in Russia, for that matter, during the 60s and 70s. And it's not until Mao dies in, I think, 76 or so, that there's a lot more, the type of art that the Chinese artists can make opens up again, right? And there's a lot more opportunities, whereas like anyway, we'll get into this as we paint here. So let's, because I've got lots of stories to tell, but only so much time. So where should we go next? Let's look at this here. Okay. So we're gonna use. We're going to mix our own dark color, as we've done many times before. So if you've been painting with me for a while, you already kind of probably have an idea of how we're going to go about this. But I'm going to show everybody, because even though there is some black in this painting, you see right now there's no black on my palette. I haven't put any black on here at all, and I'm not going to do that until we're much further into the painting. Right, we're gonna paint with just the colors we have on here. We've got 2 yellows, 2 reds, and 2 blues, and some white. So we're gonna mix our darkest color possible, and we're gonna paint with that. And then we're going to, at the very end, in the foreground, we're gonna put black. So let's just, I'm trying to decide which brush I want to use. Okay. So here's an old brush. I'm just going to probably use this brush. You know what? Let's use this one. That's better. Okay. So I'm going to mix a dark color that is also a little bit more on the cool side, because it's going to be in the background, right? And we want cooler colors in the background, and then we want warmer colors in the foreground, because what happens is warmer colors want to come forward and cool colors want to go backwards, right? So the effective use of warm and cool colors can really help create space in your paintings, right? And this is, you know, anyway, so let's so what we're going to do, we're going to start here. Let's take some cool yellow, and then let's take some cool blue. We can mix that together. And we're going to be probably mixing this color over and over and over again. Which is also really helps people learn how to use these colors, right? So we've got cool yellow, cool blue. I gotta replace these labels here. They're getting painted over. And then we're going to add some cool red. zoom out a bit here so you can see more of the palette. Okay, and then let's mix this together. And so what we'll get is, if we were, right now, it's kind of looks like a grayish purpley color. Especially the more red that I mix in here. It goes pretty purpley. Pretty purpley. Okay, so here's this color. So this is actually this is pretty darn good. I was gonna add another color to it, but I kind of like where we are right now. What I was going to do was add, if we wanted to make it even darker, is to add a little bit of warm blue and potentially some warm yellow or warm red, depending on how we want to kind of steer this color. But I think actually this color is pretty good. So I'm just continuing to mix it up, because sometimes you get like, you know, because right now you see there's a little bit more green, or you might have a pocket of red or something. Paint often gets stuck up inside the bristles there, into the ferrule, the metal part there. Okay, so that's good. Now, we are going to modify this with, we're going to make it a little, there's two things we're going to do. We're going to add a little bit of white to it, to tint it, to make it a little bit more gray, so even less dark than this. And we're probably going to add a little bit of glazing medium in here as well to make it more transparent. And I'm going to use this instead of water. Often what people will do to make the color more transparent, when we're talking about acrylic paints, often people just add more and more water to it. Which is fine if you have to. If you don't have anything like this, you could also use acrylic medium, which I always forget it's in the back far corner there. You could use acrylic medium. You could even use slow dry medium, or otherwise known as paint retarder, to make the paint a little bit more transparent. The reason why I like glazing fluid is that it thins the paint like water will be, but it still behaves like acrylic paint. When you get a lot of water in it, often what it can do is you can even see how it's separating in here. So sometimes when you add water to your acrylic paint, it kind of, it's almost like it curdles in a way. Like there's sometimes areas that are chunky and some places that are just almost totally water. So if you're painting with it, sometimes you get these blobs, all of a sudden a big solid chunk of color, so it's not an even. Whereas if you're adding a medium to it, it's going to keep its paint-like properties. So there's some paint there. And the other thing too about glazing medium is it slows the drying time down a little bit. Not a lot, but it by, like, you know, let's say if you were to apply paint regularly as is, it might dry in 10 minutes. You add slow dry medium, it might take 15 minutes to dry. Or sorry, if you add glazing medium, it might take 15 minutes to dry as opposed to just paint on its own, which might, let's just say, 10 minutes. If you add slow dry medium, it might take 20 minutes or half an hour to dry on its own, right? Anyway, there's a medium for everything, and they're all just chemicals, and they do different things. So let's get, I mean, you could just use some white. I'm gonna just take some of this, since I've got all of this extra paint here. I'm gonna just, some of it's white, but I personally like using, whenever possible, the paint that is on my canvas or my palette as much as possible, especially if it's gonna, like this right now, this would just go down the sink, or I'd wipe it away and throw it in the garbage at the end of the painting, because there's not a lot of applications for it, unless I make some egregious mistake and I want to paint it out, right? It's already got some color. It's got, yes, a little bit of that brown color in there, but mostly it's white, right? So anyway, I'm just using it to dilute this. If you were to use white as opposed to this color, your colors aren't going to change radically from what I'm doing here. So, and again, you see how when I'm mixing, I pretty much never make a big batch in one area. I'm always sort of mixing off to the side, and that way I can, if it's too dark or too light, I can just, I'm not ruining a whole batch. I can just sort of pull a little bit more color into this area here. Okay. So let's take a look at this. Whew. Okay, this is this is a painting by one of the greatest artists of all time. So, and one of the big features of his work is the level of black and darkness that we see in his painting. And if you know anything about Chinese painting and Chinese painting history, you know, I know some people are like, oh, it just looks like another Chinese painting, right? Another landscape painting. But if you were to look, I actually have thousands of images on my computer that I've been scanning in from books. I don't know if I won't show them right now, but one of the features, sorry, of you know what? I'm just going to start painting. I'm just going to show you some images, but you know, let's really a lot of the. He's really radical because of how dark his images are, right? And so usually, like I've said, there's a lot of empty blank space. He does have some of that, but compared to like historically, if you were to put like some of the, even like Chi by Chi, who we painted a few weeks ago. You know, there's a lot of empty blank space. Very little of that in today's painting. Okay, so here's, this is that color that I mixed with some white and some glazing medium. And then I'm using, again, you can see I'm using a fairly large brush to paint, especially at this stage of the painting, which is going to force me to not get into the details at this stage yet. And you can see how kind of transparent it is. Right, so I'm just gonna try painting like a layer of paint around. Right, and thinking about like where these little bumps are, I'm going to leave a little bit of blank spaces. Right, so these are kind of like little like outcroppings, or here, I'll zoom in here so you can see what I'm up to. Might be a little close. Let's see, I got this new lens thanks to your guys' donations. Now I can zoom in much closer than I've ever been able to before, but I always have to remember, like, I don't want to go too close, otherwise you won't even be on camera. Okay. All right, so kind of just where these lines are is going to be where it's a little bit darker or lighter. If you make it a little bit too dark in one place, that's okay. It'll just be your version of that, of the mountain, right? So think about the light is coming from the left, right? It's hitting the mountain from the left. And so that's why we see this area is getting highlights and this area is going to be darker. And as we get there, we'll darken that shortly. But okay. So here's kind of the misty part. There's this water coming down here. And, you know, I haven't even really gone back into the paint to get more paint, really, since, except early on in the painting. Mostly I'm just using the paint that's still on my brush. So I'm just leaving these little gaps. It's like I'm making stripes on a tiger or something, right? I'm going to come down here. I'm going to leave like kind of a halo of white down here as we get closer to the bottom. And also as I get closer down towards, I think I'm actually going to back out a bit. Might be a little close. As I get down here, we want to kind of get it lighter and lighter. So we have the kind of a darker part of the mountain on the top, and then it's going to get lighter, and then it's going to be really dark on the bottom where all the figures are. Okay, so as I come down here, I'm just going to be fairly light-handed in this area here. There's some trees. And you can see that he added some white back on to some areas here. Like, so for instance, you can see there's white mixed into the paint, and we've got this kind of gold, or like I was going to say golden, like white teal, bright teal happening in here, right? In a bunch of different places. So if you've gone too dark, don't worry about it. We're going to add some brighter areas as we go here. Some people looking at this might find this a little bit tricky to do. You do your best. I wouldn't worry about making this perfect. Any part of this painting, for that matter. Okay. So as I zoom out, so it's like I'm kind of leaving these little gaps of white in between the different mountains, because I could then wait for this to dry, paint over top of everything with the exact paint that I have, and obviously the places that I left blank will go this dark, but then I'll have double the darkness if I paint on in the darker areas, right? In fact, we'll be doing something very similar to that shortly here. Where's my mountain? Okay, here's my mountain. Right, I still haven't gone back to get more paint on my brush. Especially as I start coming down here, I can get a little bit more dry brush technique. Let me see my camera there. Let's back out all the way. Okay, so here I'm going to go, this is really one of the first times I've gotten more paint on my brush since we began this. And let's just do a little bit more up in here. So this this is the darker side of this mountain, right? The lighter side is off the edge. We don't see it, right? So that's why it gets really dark here. And this mountain is in front of it, so it's getting the brunt of the light. And as I get down closer down here, the paint is sort of just running off, running out of it on my paintbrush, so it's getting drier and drier anyway. If you happen to have a lot of paint on your brush, you can just take a rag, and to make a dry brush, you literally just dry your brush off. You just wipe it off, and then whatever's left is your dry brush, right? And, oops, remember I was saying I was going to leave a little bit of a halo? Okay, so I'm just going to make sure I do that. But, you know, if I do goof up or in any place, I'll just add some white into my paint as we go. Right, see how much lighter this paint is here? And sometimes I even just go back into the painting and just steal some paint, wet paint from earlier on. That's also going to help those areas dry a little faster too. I just saw out of the corner of my eye in the comment there, Gail saying, "Go Leafs, go." Yeah, if you're a hockey fan, there is definitely a big hockey game going on right now. Don't tell me the score, because I'll watch it. I usually watch all those things later on after everyone's gone to sleep. And so, okay. So even right here, everyone's painting is going to look a little bit different, just the way that you start kind of laying in some of these outlines, right? Let's continue down below, and don't worry about getting all the little misty parts down. This is just our first layer. Again, this would be your this is like officially our underpainting, right? So this is just like laying in some basics. Okay, so let's now do, I'm just going to make this a little bit darker now. So I'm just going to take, so this is my glazing medium and paint. I'm just going to add a little bit more paint into it. So it's going to be a little bit darker, a little bit less transparent. And because I'm moving closer into the horizon now, and these are going to be these trees. Now, obviously, you know, my painting is much smaller than his original painting, so I'm not going to be able to go in and do all of the gorgeous little details that he put into his painting, right? And just also time-wise, you know, he would spend, you know, days working on his paintings, which is also a kind of a different, kind of a break from the past. Often, like in the history of Chinese art, there's like a really big, like painting kind of quickly is seen as, like, you know, a sign of masterfulness, right? If you can make that painting really quickly, then it shows it's just like calligraphy. If you can, he was also a great, highly prolific calligrapher, and but anyway, as many Chinese artists were and are, but you know, if you could do like a perfect painting very quickly, then that would certainly be seen as like a gifted painter, which is kind of different than in the Western tradition, right? There's often, when paintings are done quickly in the West, people would be quick to say like, it's lazy or sloppy or any number of negative comments. My kid could do that, all that kind of stuff, right? So I'm just sort of laying in a bunch of stuff here, right? Just having some fun, not being too concerned about being perfect or anything like that. Okay. So that's good for my first layer of paint. Okay. So that means I need to take a sip of tea. Oh, Heidi says, I have to go to the vet to pick up my cat after leaving her there in the morning. May catch up later. Have a good class. Oh, I hope your cat is better. I know you've had some difficulties health-wise with your cat for a while, so I hope your cat makes a full recovery, Heidi. And Deborah says, take care, Heidi. Let us know how she is. Yes, absolutely. And Gail, yes, like I said, I'm going to have to join up again later. A big hockey game on television, so got to watch some and have a burger with the hubby. Go Leafs, go. So good luck on the game. I find it so stressful watching. I'm a huge hockey fan, but like, whew, that's why I like watching them later, because I can just like skip ahead, because I just like, sometimes I'm just like, I can't watch it just in real time. Oh my goodness. So this would be like a really, like, I'm very, very happy with this painting at this stage, right? This is where I'd like to be, if I was just painting on paper, this is where I'd like to be 20 minutes into the painting, right? I'd like to be able to just do something, if I was painting in it in this, well, in any style, but even like in specifically this Chinese painting style, this is where I'd like to be at this point, right? You can see that I'm also painting everything. I didn't start here and make the perfect mountain up here and make the perfect misty thing. I'm just going to paint the whole thing, get everything into place, feel like I've got, and then I'm going to add another layer, and then another layer as I slowly go over the whole painting, which for some people is frustrating, because you almost have to sort of imagine the whole thing in your mind as you're painting it, and as in different layers. But I think it's just like, it also, you save a lot of paint. I think ultimately saves you time, because instead of having to mix the same color dozens of times as you paint around here, we mix it once, apply it. Now we can, what we're about to do, I think this is, I'm just going to blow dry this really quickly, so that when I apply the next layer, I don't wipe away any paint, because that's what can kind of happen if you've got paint that's almost dry and you start painting on top of it. It sort of just scrubs it away, basically. So personally, I love when things look like this, right? Like I love the look of Chinese landscape paintings, like this very loose style of painting. Now, and that loose style of painting, there are definitely artists, Chinese artists, going back again over 1,000 years. Some of them definitely had high amount of detail, high precision of detail, and also some of them got kind of dark, like in terms of the amount of black on the canvas. But Lee Keran was really kind of the darkest of all of the landscape painters up until, during the course of his life. I think the communist regime saw even these painting, like a painting like this that we're doing, as being very Western, right? That he's using too much Western influence in his painting, and therefore it's like anti, it's, what were the terms that would be used, like anti-revolutionary or anti-Chinese, or capitalist or too Western, all those kind of ways of disparaging the work. So, because he did, I think it was like late 1950, 1957, Lee Keran goes to Germany to study painting. And when he's there, he goes to there's some really great museums in Berlin, art museums, if you're ever there, my goodness. He goes there and he sees the Rembrandt paintings for the first time. He is blown away. Like, he had seen some of those images before. It wasn't like he had never heard of Rembrandt. He knew who he was, and he would have seen images in textbooks, etc. But just like anyone else, you see these paintings in person, and they are incredible, right? The amount of depth, and also and there's a lot of depth because there's a lot of darkness, right? Rembrandt used this very theatrical type of lighting known as chiaroscuro, and it might be just worth just to take a quick second here. Here. Oh, sorry. So we just type in Rembrandt right into here, and look at this self-portrait by Rembrandt. Like, the face bathed in shadow. Like, we can just barely see some eyes in here. Like, where does the hair and where does the forehead end and the hair begin? It's not really clear, right? It sort of disappears, right? So this is, again, known as like a kind of a theatrical lighting. Like, you see this film noir in the 1940s and 50s, that film genre. Humphrey Bogart, you see a Maltese Falcon, right? Or Casablanca, you have a very striking contrast, right? And so Lee Keran, when he saw these artworks, was like, whoa. Like, yeah, I kind of understood there was this difference in East and West, and now I'm standing in front of some large paintings, and I get it. Like, whoa. And it's really interesting. I think it's this video here. Let's see if I can. So here he is. This is a student of Lee Keran, talking about the chiaroscuro. Here, I'm going to see if I can give you He treasured it, he studied it, he looked at it, he talked about it to me many times. And that's why I wrote an article about it. Rembrandt's chiaroscuro technique solves the problem of Chinese painting. And so was totally new to me. I'd never heard of this before, but he talks about how, this student, again, of Lee Keran, talks about how Chinese painting was often done on paper and on scrolls, right? And those scrolls are meant to be rolled up and then unrolled at different times for private viewing within a house. And And so Lee Keran he saw this exhibition of paintings of all these scrolls unraveled and then hung on the walls, and he felt really depressed when he saw it, because he was like, wow, these paintings, this is not the way they're supposed to be seen, and they look, I can't remember the way he describes it in that video, but he says like he felt like, I think almost embarrassed. He was like, oh, they look really weak on the wall compared to the Rembrandts that he had just seen. And he was like, oh, if we're gonna hang these Chinese paintings on the wall, then they're gonna have to look different than the way we've been painting them for 1,000 years, because they don't really look that good on the wall. They just they kind of disappear, and you don't see the details because there's not this level of contrast that Rembrandt was using, right? So that sets off like a thing in his mind, like, okay, I gotta get some dark areas, and instead of having mostly blank canvas with just little tiny figures and little things in the mist, we're gonna go the opposite. We're gonna have mostly black or red and little highlights here and there, right? So for us, it might not seem like a big deal, but for him, and then, as I said, for the Chinese authorities later on, that was a big deal. Like, so much so that it's the kind of thing that people get taken away in the middle of the night and sent to a re-education camp, which had happened to some of his friends, right? So by painting in this style, he was really pushing the boundaries, right? So much so that he really stopped painting for about a decade, or he was painting quietly, privately on his own, but certainly would not have been showing any of the paintings he made in the late 60s, early 70s to anybody. So it wasn't until Mao died that he started showing those works. Okay, so anyway, let's get back to painting, Michael. But I love all this stuff. I can talk about this stuff all day long. Okay, so this is now nice and dry. So now let's just take the same thing. I'm going to take in fact, I'm going to add a little bit more glazing medium back into here. So basically this is the exact same color I applied the first time, but now when we paint, and it might be a little bit too much on there, so I'm just going to take a bit off on the edge, right? And now as we paint it, especially into some darker areas, things are going to slowly get darker. Right, so let's zoom in here. Okay, so it's like I'm now putting a second layer of the same paint into some places, and that's going to darken it. Now, I'm actually going to you can, if you're a little bit more, if you're on the beginning side of things, you can take your time and build up like maybe 5, 6, 7 layers of very thin, transparent color, which is not too far off of how he would have done it. He's painting with ink, right? But he would be diluting that ink quite a lot, and so he could do a lot of layers on there over and over again. I, however, don't have that luxury of time. I want to move a little bit faster, so I'm just going to take a little bit. Oops, I'm just going to take a little bit more of this paint into here. So, I'm going to end up losing a little bit of, like, see how much darker that is all of a sudden. But I want to try to get this painting done in a reasonable amount of time. So, I'm cutting a few corners here. So I'm painting, I'm still using a bit of a larger brush. And I'm not going to paint over everything I did before, but I'll do most of it. Right? Including, like, you can paint over this layer from before a little bit like that, right? And now we still see some of it kind of coming through. Okay. So again, the right side here is the darker side. You can see already more dimension happening in the painting as we start adding a little bit more darkness. So whereas before it was a little bit more on the flat side, now it's starting to kind of get a little bit more depth and space in here. Just back it out all the way. Another thing that Keran is kind of known for is he is very interested in painting directly from life. So he probably would have painted this painting on location, which would have been a little bit different than how many Chinese artists historically would have painted. A lot of traditional Chinese painting would have been done like in a studio, on a big table in a studio, sitting down, whereas he would do at least like sketches like on location and painting from life, which again is more of the Western tradition of painting, and would have been another reason why the authorities would come knocking at the door. So So you could see why it'll be nice if we paint. I think we'll do maybe another layer of this in the background, and then we'll start really working on the foreground. And we put black down here, it'll push all of this further back instantly. Right? So it's the kind of the selective use of this building up these darker layers, which is going to help create a lot of depth in this painting. Right, so some of this is kind of wet, so as I'm painting on it, I'm kind of scrubbing some of that paint off, so I just have to be mindful of maybe not painting in that area. So here's some more paint, and I'm just going to go over some of these areas right here. So the only places I think that might have no paint whatsoever might be this area right here, a few of these little parts. Down here in this kind of misty waterfall area, kind of looks like where the water is kind of spraying up and kind of creating a fog or something in up and around here, right? And obviously up in the sky. But almost everywhere else is going to have a little bit of paint, very thin amount of paint. Okay. So let's get in here. As it gets darker and darker, I can go pretty wild into these areas because it's much darker. And just remembering to keep a little bit of this halo around these trees down here. Okay. That's good. I like this a lot so far. And you, as your brush gets a little bit drier, you can then kind of go into some of these areas I said that are kind of fog-like, and just put a little bit of dry brush around there to kind of give it that misty kind of quality. You can also kind of go around down here, around these trees a bit. Just, I mean, there's probably barely anything showing up on the screen right now because it's so dry that it's barely anything happening there. Anyway, so let's come down here and do the same thing. We're going to go put some black in here as we go, but okay. And then I'm just going to come back and get a little bit darker in the darkest parts. I may have to use the blow dryer here. We'll see. It's a little bit darker than I wish, so let me see if I can just wipe a bit away. Okay. Okay. You know, before I move on, I'm just going to put that brush into the water to kind of clean that up. And I think I'm going to do a little pass here with just a much smaller brush to get in a little bit more detail. And again, I'm not going to go, you know, deep in with detail. I'm just going to almost kind of fake out the detail. So let's get a little bit more glazing fluid here on there. Oops. Close. There we go. So this is a much smaller brush, right? And just get some paint on there and then bring it into the slow drying, or this was, sorry, my glazing fluid, satin glazing fluid. And let's zoom right in, just so you can see. Let's go all the way up top here, and let's zoom right in there. Look at that gorgeous detail. All right, so now we're in the same place. And this is fairly transparent, so I'm going to actually get a little bit darker. Right, these little tiny trees on top here. Okay. Now you can see that he's also like, he's doing this almost throughout the entire area of this canvas. Like when we get up close, you can see that it's built up of like thousands of these little brush strokes. You can see I went a little bit darker there, but that's totally fine. Actually, it works. So I'm just adding a little bit more of the paint into this mixture. And I'm not going to have time to put thousands of little brush strokes in here. Almost like a pointillist painting. You know, we're really tight in and close on this painting. So it'll look, to my eyes, and I'm looking at it, looks much better than it does on camera. So let's just zoom out. We start seeing sort of what the cumulative effect of these marks do. Okay. Actually, let's zoom back out on this. All right, and then we can do, I'm actually going to take some much darker. This is without much white at all in these areas, but no black, remember? And then just sort of now complicating these, like so far, you know, we just had these kind of little arcs, right? Now I kind of want these to be kind of going up and down and zigzagging around and interlocking and overlapping. And that's going to give it more of that look of just like trees growing on a hill. And if you're using relatively transparent paint, this is not super transparent, but it's certainly more. It's got a little bit of glazing fluid in here, but you can do many layers of this, and it's the overall. When all of these little layers add up together is when we get these really cool, the convincing look of the landscape, right? So for instance, right now I'm going to just take my brush and go into the glazing fluid and get a much more transparent color. And then I'm going to do the same thing in here, right? You know, it's like, oh, you can barely see anything. But it'll give just this super subtle hint to the eye that there's texture there. And so it's almost just painting like little stripes on top of things here. Right, so let's just zoom out and we can kind of start seeing how this effect starts playing out on the overall picture. All right, let's zoom this out too. So you see how all these little tiny marks just start giving, especially as if they're a little bit kind of haphazard, start giving it this rough, random kind of quality. Which is, you know, nature certainly does have patterns, but often it's like, it's quite random, and to paint that in that way is kind of tricky, because as people we want pattern. We always look for pattern, or we love look of pattern. We love synchronized swimming, and when people dance together in unison, it's super powerful. Like, think about the speaking of like Chinese culture, like think about like the Beijing was the Beijing Olympics, yeah, where they had those like amazing performance. I think it was the opening ceremonies where they had all those dancers, and like thousands of dancers, and they're all moving in unison together. I mean, they're not, obviously the Chinese weren't the only ones to do this at Olympic ceremonies, but it just seemed like the level of coordination was way higher than I had seen before. I don't know a lot about dance, so this is just my own ignorant view, or what I saw anecdotally, but it was just like, whoa, that is cool. So we love seeing when things kind of, when we see patterns unfold. But if we do too much of like patterns when we're doing landscapes, it'll become, well, it can still be really cool. It becomes super stylized. There's nothing wrong with stylized, but it'll definitely look less quote-unquote realistic, assuming that's what you're going for, right? Because I think, well, not everybody, but a lot of people probably taking this class want to learn how to paint things that they see, and once you've learned that, then you can certainly be more and more expressive, because you feel more confident that you're not just doing abstract painting because you don't feel like you're confident enough to do anything else, right? Or other than that. Okay. This is great. I feel really happy with the way things are going so far here. And as you know, as you can see, as we get down into, like, basically this area here is the closest to us. So this area with these trees are the closest to us, and therefore the darkest. This area right here is probably, these mountains right here are the kind of, so this is our foreground. Here's our middle ground, and then here is our background, and this is the far background over here, right? So we have the darkest, middle dark, less dark, and then barely visible kind of thing, right? So he looks like he's doing the same sort of thing with trees, but I think with some white paint on top of here to give some white highlights. So maybe we'll do a little bit of that as we go. Now, to get some of these rocks, I'm going to change the direction of my brush strokes. Instead of going vertical, I'm going to do a little bit of horizontal marks to get a different type of effect, right? So let's zoom in on this as we look closer into this area here, these mountainy. So we can paint some of these kind of stones. So here's this like water going over the waterfall. Man, you look at it up close, it's just like, that is gorgeous. Oh, it's a little intimidating, but don't let it scare you out of painting the painting at all, right? Let's see, let's go like this. Okay, let's get a few little stripes up here. So I'm probably not, I'm not going to spend all this time doing all these little tiny trees in the shadows in here, but you can see how effective it is. You know, all of this stuff right in here. Isn't that gorgeous? Oh my goodness. What a genius. Oh my goodness, I just love it. Okay, so I'm just going to continue. Let's back that out. In this area and here, I'm pretty happy with where everything else looks there. You know, so much so that even though I could do a lot more detail in there and more layers of darkness, I might just move on and then spend the rest of my attention on the bottom kind of quarter of the painting. The other thing too is once you've got a bunch of these little marks on here, these little trees, you can even paint over them and make them darker and darker so that they're almost disappear, but they'll still kind of have little ghost qualities there in the shadows, and that is also very satisfying. It's very satisfying as a viewer to see the shadows and to realize they're not just a big blob of paint, a big black, you know, textureless area, that because that sort of looks like you as an artist just cheated and you're just like, oh, here's the dark side of the mountain, I'm just going to make it all black, right? Well, but there's stuff there. It's just there's a lot of shadow in there. The greatest artists in history wouldn't just do that. They would go and paint maybe weeks upon weeks on weeks things in the shadows, so that if you were to buy that painting or you stand in front of it in a museum and you look at it, sometimes it's like magic. You start seeing the things in the shadows. They start emerging from it. And it rewards you as a viewer for giving the painting your attention. It's as it should, right? Like, I think a good painting literally changes as you look at it, and you see things that you didn't see before, and it just gets more complex, and you see details that you didn't even realize were there. So Like even that, we're talking about Rembrandt and theatrical lighting. So yes, it does get really dark, where so we looked at that, I showed that image briefly of the self-portrait Rembrandt did, and I said you couldn't see where his forehead ended and the hair began because it's all in a really dark shadow. But the thing is it's there. There is, he would have painted it. It's just that he has made it so dark that when you just take a glance at it, you can't see it. But if we were to take a look and you'd be in the museum staring at it, you would slowly start to see more and more as your eyes kind of acclimatize to the light. And that is like the most cool experience as a museum goer, is when you start seeing those things and that's often like when I'm at a museum, I'm often there looking. When you first travel and you go to a museum and you're in a rush and you only have an hour or two to go see a museum like the Louvre, and you're just trying to check things off the list so at least you can say like, oh, I saw this and that. When you get home, people are going to ask you about it. But if you have the opportunity to live in a city with a good art museum, or you're able to travel a little bit more frequently, being able to go back and go to, like, the last time I was at the Louvre, I had like because I've had the great fortune to be able to travel and with my art, and so last time I was at the Louvre, I had a list of like 10 paintings that I wanted to see. I did go check out the Mona Lisa just out of curiosity, even though I've seen it many times, but it's like probably the most, I think it's more of a, talk about a theatrical kind of thing. I was just most interested to see the gaggle of people. In fact, I took a whole bunch of pictures of people taking pictures of the Mona Lisa because I just thought it's so funny. Like it's, I don't know, it's like a freak show at a carnival when they used to do those things. Like it's this thing kind of hidden. It's just, you can't really see the Mona Lisa when you go to the museum. Like it's just you're about a bus. Well, how far are you away? It'd be about like 5 or 6 meters away from the painting, which is like 20 feet away from the painting. It's behind bulletproof glass. Like you can't really see that. You could see it much clearer on your computer later on when you get home. There's images of it, or in the gift shop, right? But anyway, going in and just standing in front of a painting that you really like and just looking at it for a while. And you see people walking by looking at you like, what is this guy looking at? Like I'll be looking at a painting on the wall and I'm like, oh wow. And people will come up and they're looking at me like, I wonder what he's, right? Because it is kind of funny in a way, it's kind of ridiculous to be standing in front of an artwork for so long when there's so many other things like the Louvre. You could run through it at top speed. You could, on a motorcycle, and you probably wouldn't see everything in 4 or 5 hours, right? It's such a vast museum. Okay. So far, I'm very happy with the background. Yeah, I mean, I might darken a few things as we go here. You see how I'm putting a darker line there? I'm kind of deliberately making it a little bit wobbly. So that it kind of almost, again, simulates the same look as these trees. Let me do that. I'm going to zoom in closer. I'll do it up here as well. Right, so it's this. Let's do another one of those. Let's go in here. Okay. So this gets much darker. We'll see. I'm going to move on from this here in a second because I don't want to go too dark until I see how dark this needs to go. All right. Okay, that's pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with everything here so far. I have an idea that I think I might darken little parts up here and here, but I think it's now time to tackle this detail in the bottom. So let's zoom in a bit. Here, let's start on our left corner. Okay, then let's go. Let's go here. Okay. Let's take a quick sip of tea. And green tea by chance. This is my green tea. I have some Earl Grey tea here. But I tend to drink so much tea in the day that I now kind of space it out with a couple cups of green tea throughout the day so that I'm not up all night long. Okay. Woo! So, I think at this point I'm just going to clean my brush a little bit here before I move on. It's always a good idea to clean your brush, even, the brush that you're using, even though you're like, oh, I'm dipping it into the paint, every once in a while, so that, because the paint starts to dry as it gets up into the, into this metal casing here, the ferrule, right? So if you're painting for like 8 hours and you keep painting, slowly as the paint goes up the bristles there, it's going to get harder and harder, and then you're just going to have this little tiny tip at the very end that is wet or flexible, really. So, I just see a few areas where I have a lot of texture. I'm just going to take a little bit of, take my brush and just dab down some of that texture. Not that I don't dislike texture, just sometimes I find it can be excessive. And sometimes after the painting's dry, if there's big areas of texture, they cast weird shadows or they get weird highlights of light on them. And you might not notice it until later on when you just have a little bit more even light or whatever. So, and it can kind of be a little jarring. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing down in this area. I'm going to paint it with one of my darker colors, not black yet. Again, no black until the very, very end, right? So because this allows me to have a lot more control over what exactly goes black, right? And maybe I'll do all of it black, but probably won't. But anyway, so let's dive into this. So, how do I want to approach this? Love all these details, but there's a lot of it. So, I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to draw or paint the kind of structure of some of these trees first. Right, so these kind of spindly trees. And you know what? I'm just going to continue this. I'm going to kind of go over here. Now I am going to darken a bunch of this, and maybe some of these lines won't even be visible afterwards, but it's just like I was talking about before. Rather than just have a big clump of dark in these areas, if people can see some of these details, I want them to be able to appreciate that I've given it that extra little bit of love and attention. Okay. Now, one of the beautiful things about his image there is you can see that there's trees in the distance that, you know, so if we wanted to do this, like, really, really great job of it, we would probably do a lighter version of these same trees and then paint over and do the same thing again, but darker, right? So I'm not going to do that. I don't have the time to do that. Let's zoom over here. Let's just keep on trucking. And as I said, some of this I'm going to put black over top. But if I really wanted to add like some depth here, like so for instance, these trees here on the hillside, right? If I just paint them like this and then I paint black over top of a bunch of this is going to look like they're a little bit further away. Okay. That's probably good. Let's do this little thing down here. So we're just going to tackle this. It sounds like they're having some fun upstairs. My daughter has a friend over. There's some stomping and singing and oops, let's move this here. So just tackling this from here. Okay. So, while I'm right here, this is a little bit trickier to do because it's, you know, it's pretty small details. But I'm not just going to sort of do like what I did with the mountains and add these like little, you know, they tend to be like little tiny branches or leaves, right? And don't worry about making them too pretty. Obviously in his picture we could see lots more beautiful details. Let's move that here. Yeah, I'm getting kind of a little bit sloppy just because I'm moving quickly, but it's, you know, especially if you're a beginner painter, it's not about getting all of the detail. It's just really about trying to create something that's fairly convincing, that we understand that these are trees on a hillside, right? And if people can get that, then that's probably more than enough. Remember that most people are not, like, look how close I am. This is my thumb right here. Most people are never going to look at this painting this closely, right? Which is a bit of a tragedy, but it's also just, you know, that's just life, right? Even the original people are probably not going to look at very few people have ever looked at the original at this kind of level of closeness. So, okay, so now I'm just going to go in here and start painting the ground. And then we'll put a few people in here. Oh, so, all right, let's stick in this area, I guess, Michael. So now I'm just going to kind of contour around here with my darker colors. So you could see what he did is he got pretty close to all of this as he kind of outlined things. That would be totally fine to do. What I would suggest, though, is don't go too close at this stage. Like, just paint in a bunch of this first, right? This is basically now the paint with very little medium in it. Almost just pretty much the paint just as it is, right? And you can see, and I'm trying to kind of move around as I'm doing it so that I'm not staying in one place too long, because that helps also give it a bit more of a chaotic kind of quality. Alright, and then when I'm up here, I'm not really looking at the original in this area. I'm just using a bit of my imagination. Okay. And I think what I'll do now, I'm going to paint a few people. I'm not going to be able to do too many. So I'm going to keep these people kind of pretty simple. So I'm just going to kind of paint them like I did trees. Basically like little rectangular kind of things. And I'm also painting a little bit lighter, or more lightly. And then I'm just going to put little, so they're kind of like Lego figures or something, right? So let's do a few more here. It's like little rectangles and little dots. We'll see, but I don't know how I've... it looks kind of silly a little bit, but I'm going to put some arms and flags and stuff here too. Okay. Yeah, let's put this. I'm going to tidy that flag up later on. Where's another one? Got another flag. I don't know how many, let me see, in the trees here, hey? Another one there. And then there's another one by the end of the waterfall. Okay, so, oh, and then I was going to put maybe a few, like, hands, or I think these are soldiers on a march, so they're got rifles and things with them. Okay, so let's back it out, and you'll see kind of how things look at this stage on my painting. Okay, and let's just see where we are here. Just thinking about my time. I don't know if I'll get to painting the other painting. Otherwise, it'll be a long session tonight. Maybe I'll do another episode in the future on this artist. Okay. So I'm going to blow dry this. I like where everything is right now. The next step is I'm going to go darker. I'm not going to go full black. I'm going to mix some black into this paint, and I'm going to start getting more darkness in here. And I may even take a little bit of that darker color and put it in a select few places in the middle ground here, like by the waterfall. I probably am not going to put black anywhere else further back there. Otherwise, I'm just going to flatten the whole picture. Okay, so let's mix this up. I don't have any black, so let's get some black out on here. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, I was thinking I want to see, what I want to try to do is get a little bit more warmth in here, right? We mixed this cooler gray, and we've been painted the whole picture mostly in cool grays. So right now everything kind of wants to move back. What I want to do is I want to take a bit of warm yellow, and I'm going to mix this into the color. So right now we get a kind of a greenish kind of thing going on. So this is the same color we've been using. And I'm going to take some warm blue and add into here as well. So now we've got this same color, but it's much warmer. We're warming it up. I'm also going to take a little bit of warm red and throw it in here. Might have been a little heavy on the warm red, but let's blend it in here. Yeah, as we blend it in there, it's kind of, there we go. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go put this color into the foreground in a number of places, like the trees, before I even go to the black. Actually, I'm going to take a bit of cool blue, put that just so that it's not too brown. There we go. Let's get a little more warm blue in here. So this effect is going to be, you know, I put a little too much cool blue in there, so now I'm just going to make a bigger batch here, because then I made it go a little bit too cool. It's too cool, dude. So need more blue. Okay, so I'm going to try using this color now. And even without adding any black, we should also see now a little bit more separation happening. So let's go into here. Maybe we'll zoom in. And you know what, maybe I'm going to do some of the trees, but not all of them. That way I can kind of, again, create a little bit more depth. And same thing, I might do some of the figures, but not all of the figures. Just give me 1 second. I forgot to plug these things in here. 1 second. Actually, let's keep this here. Okay. So let's keep on painting. Ah, that whole thing just turned right off. Okay. Darn it, I gotta go back there and turn it back on. Maybe I'll let it charge for a second. Technology, technology. Always a bit frustrating. So we'll zoom out and you can start, well, maybe I'll just show you what this looks like. Oops, not all the way out. Here. So this is just my my warmer gray. Obviously I did not add any white to it, so it is obviously it's going to be darker, but it is noticeably warmer. And that noticeably warmer color is going to help push things closer to the viewer, to the front of the picture plane. Okay. So I'm just going to darken in a bunch of things, not everywhere, but I'm just going to kind of add a little bit of ground area here. Then I think I'm going to probably glaze some of this with, I'm going to take the same color but make it a little bit more transparent. Okay, that's cool. So let's take our glaze medium and let's take this other brush. We'll just mix a bit into here. All right, so we're just thinning it out. Okay. There's a lot on there. I'm just going to wipe that off and then just take this. Actually, I should probably blow dry this so I can, because I'm kind of smearing some of the paint around. Okay, so I just got to turn this camera back on. audio back on? Good, good, okay. Okay. So, all this I'm very happy with. Just gonna do a few more. I'm gonna do the same thing with these figures. Get them a little bit darker. I'm not really gonna be able to put much detail like that he had in them, but as long as it sort of looks like there's some kind of something going on that's maybe a little bit less organic than the trees, should be fine. So I'm okay, so yeah, I'm going to take my paint here, so I've this darker, warmer color that I mixed. I'm going to take some of it with the glaze, so it's going to be darker, but not super dark. Got a bit of yellow in there accidentally, but... And I'm just going to do a little bit of work in this area here. And then I'll put black down here, put the red on the... And then I think we'll be done. So I think we're aiming for another half hour. We should be close to wrapping up. So let's zoom in here. So we're adding this little bit of a darker, again, this has got a bit of a eggplantish kind of quality, a little bit of a more purpley. So it should look immediately a little bit different than a lot of the other stuff in this middle area here. And I'm going to do some horizontal lines as I go up here, just to give it a bit more of this rough mountain-like texture. Ah, yay, yay. Got a blop of paint in the bottom right corner from my hand. Not sure where I dragged that from, but good thing I noticed it and I could wipe it away if you're quick on it. Okay. The way he did this waterfall is just genius. I love how, I think we might add a little bit of white, or our background color, but just sneak a bit of extra white into this area here to make it pop a little bit, because we don't really have any bright highlights, and I think that's what I see there. It's a little bit of white in there that helps bring our attention here, because it makes it look other than more rocks and stuff. It is really brilliant what he's done there. And that's the fun thing of doing these kind of studies, is you like, it's not really until you paint them till you like you can understand, like, you're like, ah, I see what he did there, or she did there, or they did there, right? That, you know, when you're just sort of looking at it in a museum or in a book, you're like, oh, it looks cool. It's not really until you try to paint it yourself that you start to kind of really see all the little things that they're doing that make it so cool. Okay, this area here, there's... I think that also is going to need some white. I'll come back to that. So I'm going to come over here. Because this mountain should actually be in front of this one. But right now there's a little bit of confusion there. This is the kind of thing that I don't even really necessarily notice until later on when I'm looking at it and going like, oh, how did I miss that? I tell you, I do that pretty much every painting we do so far. You know, it's like, because my nose is so close to the, you know, looking right over the painting, and sometimes I miss the really obvious things, and I'm like, oh, oops, oopsie daisies. So to get in here, bridging that gap. So I was just taking a bit of the previous color that I used in the background and just going over a little bit of stuff here. Just to darken it a bit. Okay, so you know what I think I'm going to do right now? I'm going to add some white that I haven't used. I'm going to mix... I'm going to take some white and mix it into this color here to get some highlights. Use a new tube here. Okay. So that's my white. Let's take a bit of glazing fluid, not too much. And it's always a little tricky using glazing fluid and white because they they look the same. So it's hard to kind of judge how white it actually is or how untransparent it is. One thing I've seen people do is have just some black poster paper or black canvas on a palette, and you can kind of paint your color onto a darker surface. You can see how dark or light it is anyway. So let's go in here. Right, very subtle. I'm just gonna put this white up a little bit higher. Kind of blend it out a bit. It's kind of misty-ish. You can use your mop brush. Just to kind of delicately spread it around. So this again is why putting a little bit different colored ground down, like that eggshell color, works, because now when we start painting white down, it's not just the white of the canvas showing through. We have a little bit of this, we see some white, and that's going to pull our attention right to this area here. Similarly, let's mix, I think I'm going to mix a new teal color. So I'm just going to take my cool blue, cool yellow, make it a bit more on the bluish side. Let's take some white and just mix this in here. Okay. And then I can use this color to do a bit of highlighting on the mountains and other places. So he's sort of like it's a little heavy-handed, Michael. I could probably add a little bit more white into it. So I'm going to have to go back and darken some of this. I was thinking I could have probably done this a little earlier in the process, but it's just very delicately putting this in a few places, spreading some of this love around. So as I'm putting it down, and then I can just sort of smooth some of this out with my mop brush. Okay. So I'm getting more and more white into this color. Let's put some glazing fluid in there. So now I'm painting this kind of around these trees down here. It's one of those things I didn't really think of until later on as we're getting to the. I'm like, oh, you know what? That's one of the things he's doing. He's got a bunch of it down here, doesn't he? Like, it's kind of genius. This is not stuff like that I would have thought about putting in here on my own. Like putting a teal in like this does not like the is not an something that would immediately spring to mind as a solution here, but that's again, this is why doing these paintings, this is why it's really great for me too, is like it, you know, later on when I'm making a painting, I think like, you know what, maybe I'm going to add a little bit of teal into the painting, like Lee Keran. Right, maybe that would solve whatever problem I'm running into in my paintings. Okay, and I think I'm going to put a bunch of it down here. Again, this all means I'm going to have to do a little bit extra work but now that I've kind of see how it works a little bit closer, I'm like, oh, okay. Because this looks now like a misty or foggy thing going on down there, so. little heavy-handed, as I said, on the color there. I'm just going to lighten it up a bit, go over some of those areas. What is interesting is it definitely has a bit more of like a foggy kind of quality. And so I think to myself, do I want to paint black or something over some of these areas, or keep it like this? Might be going a bit overboard. Definitely going overboard. But, you know, again, this has got to be my painting at some point, right? So I have to allow, like, I have to, it has to work for me. Like I can say, like as I always write, you know, this is a painting, as when I sign these paintings, you know, after Leonardo, after Van Gogh, after Soba Singh, you know, so after Emily Carr, after Frida Kahlo. Okay, yeah, so let's just take a look. I think you're going to be like, whoa, we went a little nuts, Michael, but okay. Yeah, you know what? I still don't mind it. I kind of think it's kind of cool, this burst of. But I'm now gonna go back with my eggplant color, as I mentioned before. And I'm just gonna go and. Actually, you know, I should blow dry all of this first and lock it in. And I just had the idea of adding a lot more white here. So I'm taking my white and slow dry medium just before I start and I'm going to paint this in here. To get a bit more of that misty thing going on. Ooh, I like that. I was gonna. It is. Definitely. I'm gonna blow dry that. I might even do a little bit more right in here. Now I can start seeing the white as opposed to the paper color. That, eggshell. This kind of quality. Let's get a bit more. Okay, so now if I take this darker eggplant color, actually let's blow dry it real quick. Now look how dark, all of a sudden the same color that was there. Right, now we can really see how it pops forward in a way that it wasn't popping before, right? Okay. Makes me feel a lot better about things. Put like a little dots, I think. Zoom in here so you see what I'm up to. So. So I'm just going to let that fade out. So I feel like that it changed things for sure, but I'm really happy with how things kind of changed. Right, so let's we zoom back out again. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to touch up, these trees down here. I want this area down here to sort of fade out into this mist, this cool mist that's rising up from below. Okay. I think it's time we put a little bit of that red on the flag. So that's just basically, I'm going to take some red, my warm red, right out of the tube. Let's zoom in. So I don't know the story behind this painting, but I suspect, obviously, that these are communist flags. I think these are like soldiers on the march who are kind of leading the revolution, and like Mao's soldiers. He was friends with Mao. I don't know how good of friends with Mao he was, but just to show you kind of like the situation at the time, even though he was good friends with Mao, he illustrated poems of Mao's in collaboration with Mao. Mao gave his approval. Like, he wouldn't just let anybody, publish an illustrated version of his poetry. But even then, he was still, despite their friendship, not allowed to fully express himself, right? There was always that threat that, if you disobey the official way of doing things, something awful could happen to you. Just saying. You do whatever you want, paint whatever you want, but something, just as a warning, just might want to think about it. So there's a number of Lee Keran's contemporaries who, I'm trying to think of who it was. It's mentioned in one of those videos, but who would wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, like no one knew that he was awake, who would go to a studio and make paintings for like a couple of decades in the 60s and 70s, and would and then come back and go back to sleep, so that his family didn't even know that in the middle of the night he was getting up, or early morning, making paintings, because it was basically illegal to make the paintings he was making. And it wasn't until like after Mao died that he started pulling all these paintings out of secret walls in his house, because that was the where did I put my, oh, there's my black is right there. Okay, so now I'm gonna go to the black, to the dark side, and put my blacks in the bottom of this painting, which is going to change things a lot, because so far we haven't gone this dark yet. So I'm taking some black. I think I'm going to have to back out here. use of black, I did put a little bit of glazing medium just so it's maybe not totally opaque black, which is super intense. Again, if I do mix it, dilute it, make it a little bit more or transparent, then it just gives me a little bit more room to go even darker if I want, right? So then that's good. It's definitely darker. It's definitely pulling like this tree forward. And as I do this on these, the trees are going to go black. I guess you can see what I'm doing here. I'm giving a little bit more of the kind of leaf-like texture in there because it's should be a little bit more. It's darker. It's closer. So it's because it's closer to us. We would expect to see a little bit more detail. Alright, so now I've got these different layers of trees in here, which, you know, is exactly what he did, so I'm happy that I'm able to kind of sneak. I didn't think I was going to be able to do that as effectively as it's looking right now. I think you can tell that that I don't know much about trees, that I'm not looking very closely at how he painted these trees, which is resulting in less, I'm not as big a fan of my trees, especially compared to his, but, you know, there's only so much. Let's see. Wow, his are awesome, aren't they? Wow, that's cool. You know, just finally taking a second to look up and look at what he did, and oh, that would have been nice if I did something like that, wouldn't it? But And then let's they look kind of ridiculous now that I make them these little dots floating on their bodies like that, but okay, and then just I'm going to finish things off by putting some black down in here into the ground, right in the foreground here. That is gorgeous. I'm just looking at the detail that he got in there. How can I do that as quickly as possible? I don't know if I can do that. Let's see if I've just put some. This kind of looks to me, the way that I've painted it, kind of like the cross section of like a rabbit burrow or something, you know, like or a ant hill or something. But I maybe should have put a little bit more of this teal down into the foreground. I think at this point it's not going to happen, but I'm just kind of getting close to these trees as I outline them. Okay, how much more do I want to do there? I don't know. Not super satisfied with the way I've done all this down here, though. That's for sure. There's this kind of brown in here, isn't there? Let's get a bit of that in. Might help things a bit. So it's going to mix this color up real quick. So red, yellow, and blue to make a brownish color. Let's add a little bit more red to it. It's a little intense. So let's just wipe that away. Kind of looks good wiped away, doesn't it? Just a little bit of glazing medium in here. Put a bit of that into the trees, didn't he? Interesting. You know, you look at a painting a little bit longer like this, and all of a sudden you just start seeing, like, oh, he did that there. Oh, he did that. Oh, yeah, interesting. Right, so. Ooh, that works really well. Helps give some of these trees that are, let me zoom in, that are a little bit in behind. It makes just, I don't know, gives them a little bit of that warmth that makes it feel like they're not so far away. Because we don't want them to appear like they're on this mountain in the background. They're clearly on this hill, so. So I'm just putting a bit into this tree that's down there. And then let's go back. That area definitely needs a bit more teal in these trees that are down here. And so it just becomes, if I do that, then I'm going to have to paint it. Let's put a bit in. We'll take some of this teal, glaze and fluid. Oops, it's gone on a bit thick. Okay, let's blow dry this and see how we feel. I probably should have made this a bit of a warmer color, a bit more of a, put some warmer yellow into this teal as I was finishing that up. So you know what? I'm going to do just that. I'm going to take some warm yellow and I'm going to mix my teal into it. And I'm going to paint back over what I just did here with this. Not everywhere, but I know this is not exactly like what is in his painting here, but I have to make my painting work, right? And I'm also just going to take some more of this brown. It's, again, not like what he did, but I love the way he used it up here. So I just want to steal a bit of it into little places in here. Now I'm going to paint over a bunch of this, so we won't see everything I'm painting here. I look at it like, oh my goodness. Sometimes when you're doing this kind of thing and you're going off the script, it's a little scary, but it's also kind of fun because you're like, well, I'm doing my own thing, right? And I'm my own artist. I began following in the footsteps of this master, and that master walks very quickly. And it's hard to keep up with someone like that, so sometimes you end up veering from the path a little bit and you don't go, well, hopefully we're going to end up in the same, shopping mall, but we might not, and hopefully we're going to end up in the food court together, but, we're going to go in our own, I'm taking the long way to get there. And I'm meeting some colorful characters along the way. Okay, so I'm going to get my black back. I'm getting my black back on. And I'm going to come back into this area in the corner. Okay. Let's start with these trees. And let's zoom in. My wife and I are watching the Netflix show Halston at night. It's called Halston, and we're watching it at night before bed. I don't know if anyone else is seeing it or watching it. It's pretty good. It's interesting. I was saying, to my wife, I said like, "Oh, this is interesting." Like Halston, I feel like I'm not that much. I'm only 5 or 6 years older than her, but she'd never heard. She loves fashion. Never heard of Halston. I was like, really? That's interesting. And I was like, I don't want to give anything away, but I think the reason why you don't know who Halston is kind of probably what this story's about. I think it's a bit of a tragedy because Halston was like the designer in the 60s, the leading fashion design, he was on top of the world. So it's kind of like, well, what on earth could possibly have happened to him? And so I think we got one episode left, and it's not looking good for Halston. Partying very hard. A lot of late nights at Studio 54. Okay. So I'm just sort of now, I'm going to zoom out a bit. Trying to get all these little details in here. Remember, this is the foreground of the picture. So this would be where you would see the most amount of detail. So I think, I'm just sort of adding almost like little dots and things in the paths, and I'm also going to get my glazing fluid. I'm going to mix this just to dilute my black a bit. Add a bit of gray where I might feel it's needed. Okay, this feels good. So, it was kind of up and down there for a while, and it's one of those things where, I said, as I always, anytime you hear me saying we're almost done, that's like, goodness, just tack on another half hour at least. So these little tiny dots, I don't know, just for me, sometimes little dots just help give it a little just extra. It's like the suggestion of some detail or something. Okay. I don't know, I think I might be done now. So let's zoom it out. zoom this out. Looks definitely different. I got this light on. Let's turn that light off so that it's not changed. Because obviously you can see how adding a little bit different light can also change the way that the painting looks. Since your paintings can sometimes look very different under like fluorescent lighting versus incandescent versus candle lights, etc. So, which can cause some frustration sometimes, right? If you paint in one area of your house and then you take your painting up to a different area of your house, like I do, where we have different lighting, okay, I think that's good. I think that's good. A little bit different. This is kind of this is what I've ended up doing down here. I like. Let me just make sure this flagpole is attached to the ground or to something anyway. It's not floating in the air. Okay. So I highly recommend watching that interview that I posted on the private Facebook page. Let's zoom out here. That was recorded with Lee Keran's son. You know, it's funny because it is darker down here. I think I could have darkened significantly areas up here a little bit. I could certainly have taken the same sort of eggplant color and put it a little bit more, or even just use the same color and darkened up there. But, you know, I don't mind it like this at all. Like, in fact, it's one of those things, like, after a few weeks of looking at this painting without the original, you know, in my face all the time, this will start to just take the life of that painting. It's sort of like this vampire that's going to suck the original out, and this one, in my mind anyway, will start to, and then eventually, you know, I'll look at the original again like, oh, that's funny, I didn't remember. It's very different than the original. But I've made it my own, and I'm really curious to see how you guys approach this painting and see what changes you may have made. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a few people that changed the flags from the communist red flag to, I don't know, pride flag, or the Canada flag, or Australian flag, or New Zealand Italian flag, or wherever it is you are on planet Earth. That could be really kind of fun and interesting way of changing the painting to make it your own. Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned before, one of my, just my own personal style that kind of comes out of habit is making things a little bit more colorful than they usually are. So, and I have no apologies for that. That's just, I just have this tendency to do it, and I kind of like it. And that happens, you know, as we make paintings. The more paintings you make, you know, at first when you're, especially when if you're following me and you're painting along and you're just like, oh, I'm just trying to do what I see on screen. I'm just trying to emulate the masters, and but slowly what happens is you're going to start cutting little corners here and there, right? You're going to start saying, you know what, I don't want to do all those trees. So I'm going to cut some of those trees out. And I'm going to move the composition down so I see maybe more of the sky. And those are little tiny examples, but slowly you start making larger decisions to do certain things. Like you go, like instead of making it more colorful, maybe you decide to go take the saturation out and it gets more and more black and white, right? Like if you painted a Van Gogh in black and white. And those would be kind of really interesting ways of kind of, like, because I think your style, you can force your style, and you could say, oh, I'm going to deliberately do this. I'm going to deliberately paint quickly, or deliberately paint very slowly. I'm deliberately going to focus on detail, or I'm deliberately going to be more broad in my approach to painting. So you can deliberately try to do that, but often you're going to just start doing things, you know, almost by chance. Like just your patience will wear thin, or you'll have a lot more patience, and you just start making some creative decisions that you might not even notice at the time. And what I think is interesting is after you're done a painting, or after you've done like 20 of them, is you look at them and you're like, like you start seeing some kind of patterns that you may not even have been aware of at the time. And that's kind of how style can evolve organically. And that's why I think you want to try to move through your paintings relatively quickly. Like, I know that, I've been painting for 3.5 hours on this painting. And I think, and I know I've been painting professionally for over 20 years now. So that might be a little fast for some of you. So it might take you 5 hours to finish this painting. But I would caution about spending 12 hours, like a really long time on any of these paintings. I think that's too long. And you might say, well, it takes me that long to get all these. So then I would say, you know what? I have a feeling that you're being a little bit too hard on yourself. You're being too much of a perfectionist. Give yourself permission to paint a little bit faster, to omit certain details, or maybe work on, I was going to say a smaller, like if you're working on a really big canvas, it's going to be really hard to do a lot in that short amount of time. That's why I like these smaller size canvases, because we can finish a pretty good painting in a relatively short period of time. And I think if you're working your way through each one of these paintings in 5 hours maximum, and then you just like call it a day and move on to the next one, I think you're going to find there's just certain tendencies that you're going to have that are going to come to the fore, and that is your own style coming through. And what's exciting is when you see your own style coming through in all of these very different artworks. So even if you're not interested in painting, one of the paintings we do next week or whatever, I would recommend trying, because I've seen in the comments sometimes people are like, yeah, I wasn't interested in painting this painting, but now I'm doing it. I'm like, wow, this is cool. This is a lot of fun. And sometimes we have what we want to paint is very different than what we're really good at, or vice versa, right? We are, what would be vice versa? I don't know. I think I should just call it a day here before I get myself all mixed up in metaphors and stuff. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining me for another one of these episodes. On this Sunday, I'm doing a special episode. I'm painting a painting in celebration of women's hockey and women's sports. I'm doing a painting of Hayley Wickenheiser, who is really the best hockey player, female hockey player ever. She's the Wayne Gretzky of hockey. She's a Canadian. She's now really one of the highest. Now she's an executive at, I think, in charge of player development for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Don't tell me the score. Don't tell me the score. I'm going to watch the game later on tonight. I know they're playing hockey. But she now works for the Toronto Maple Leafs and is really one of the most powerful women in men's hockey, which is kind of interesting. And that makes me really excited, being the father of a young daughter, is seeing the more opportunities for women in sport and people taking female athletes more seriously. So that's something that's very personal to me. I instead of making a painting of Wayne Gretzky, which I could obviously do, I want to make paintings that I can leave for my daughter, who knows how long I'll be around, that would inspire her as she grows older, right? So, and Haley Wickenheiser, you can't really find a better person. She's won every single possible accolade and medal and championship that you can think of within her sport, including, I think she was a baseball player too. Like, she's done everything. Okay, so you'll see. I'll show you guys on Sunday if you choose to join me. So thank you everyone for spending your evening with me and painting a painting by this fantastic master artist, Lee Keran. We will see you again very shortly, very soon, in just a few days. Have a good night, everybody. We will see you very soon.